How's it going, everyone? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I've got my next project worked out, and you know what it is? We're going to turn this into this. That's right, everyone. We are using barley, and we're turning it into an all-grain, peated Irish whiskey. Welcome to Distiller, everyone. I'm Jesse, and this is the channel all about chasing the craft of home distillation and making it a legitimate hobby. We do all sorts of stuff here. We talk about the still a whole lot, but right now we're talking recipes, all grain recipes. So if that's what you're into, guys, if that malts your barley, make sure you're subscribed down below. Also, make sure you ring that notification bell as well, and then you guys will be notified every time I make a new video. You won't miss anything. Alright guys, it's always exciting to start a new project, to learn something new, to do something new, and of course, to create something new. In the intro, I did show you this, which is Connemara. It is a peated single malt Irish whiskey, which is pretty unique. You don't get a lot of peat in a lot of Irish whiskies. And while I am basing this recipe on something kind of like this, do not be fooled into thinking that I am trying to clone Connemara specifically or accurately. It's more just inspiration for this recipe. So when I sat down and started building this recipe in my mind, with the help from the guys on Patreon, of course, I wanted to do a few things. One is I wanted it to be pot stilled with a whole lot of flavor. Two, I did want a fair amount of peat in it. And three, I wanted to go after that Irishy flavor with some unmalted barley as well as malted. And that, of course, brings me to the grist, the recipe, and I figure this is as good a time as any to go through that right now. First up, let's start with, I guess, the vital statistics of the recipe. I'm aiming for about 150 litres worth of wash. According to Beersmith, that is going to be an original gravity of 1072, finishing at 1012 for a ABV of a little over 8%, but my guesstimation is that it is going to finish a whole lot lower than that. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not exactly worried about how much alcohol I get out of this. It's more about how much flavor I can cram into it. First up, the base of this recipe is distiller's malt, and I am specifically using Gladfield's distiller's malt, which is grown, I believe, and malted right here in New Zealand, which is pretty cool. I am using 20 kilos of Gladfield distiller's malt. Next up, for the unmalted barley, to give that biscuity Irish sort of flavor, I am going with another 20 kilos of steam flaked barley. Now the idea here is that because it's steam flaked, it is already gelatinized. I don't have to worry about gelatinizing it, but keep in mind, guys, this is not malted barley, so it does not have any active enzymes to convert its own starch. We're relying on the distiller's malt and the other malts I have having enough diastatic power to convert the steam flaked barley as well. Now we get to the fun stuff. 9 kilos of Bard's heavy peated malt. I don't think we need a whole lot of explanation for that. It's peated. I want a peated flavor. Let's put some in there. Now, you may notice, guys, that this is a decent amount of peat, but it is definitely not over the top. I am not aiming for a Lafroig or an Islay whiskey. I'm not aiming for a peat bomb, but I do want there to be enough peat so that it has kind of a solid impact on the final flavor. I know that the Connemara states that it's a single malt. I am obviously not making a real Irish whiskey because I'm not in Ireland. I'm just making something that I guess is an impression, something that kind of tastes like what you would expect if you said this is an Irish whiskey. You know, you wouldn't be surprised at the way it tasted. So with that in mind, I am also going to add 4 kilos of rolled oats. Now these are quick oats, so once again they have been gelatinized, but obviously they do not have any diastatic power of their own, And the reason I'm adding this is to add fuller, smoother, slicker mouthfeel. Essentially what I'm trying to do is make this spirit a little bit more approachable, give it the impression of a little bit more age earlier, hopefully is what I'm going for. And if I do get some of those oaty flavors showing up, I'll be totally happy with that as well. Now here's the kicker, guys. The last thing that I'm adding in is 1.5 kilos of Gladfield's dark chocolate malt. But essentially the idea here is, team, that I do like the darker flavors and spirits. Personally, that's something that makes me happy. So I like the coffee, I like the chocolate, I like the stone fruit, the dark fruit, the plum, dates, raisin, all that sort of thing. Essentially, I'm trying to crowbar in some complexity via the specialty malt rather than just letting the age and the wood do the trick later on. You may have noticed that I haven't mentioned what yeast I'm going to be using, and yeah, we'll talk more about that later on. Also, for those Patreons that do get the recipe files, I will be posting this recipe in an Excel sheet for you over on Patreon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. I don't want to talk too much about process right now because, to be honest, this is going to be kind of tricky. What I will say is that I'm planning on fermenting on the grain. I'm a little bit scared of that and how I'm going to deal with straining it at the end, but that's future Jesse's problem, basically. Anyway, guys, the steam flake barley is not milled quite as finely as I would like, and I need to get my boiler full of water so I can heat it up. I'm going to do both of those things right now, and I'll check in with you again tomorrow when I'm ready to mash in. We now have 110 litres in here at 70 degrees. Now the calculator said 69, I'm going with 70 because I think it's going to be easier to cool it down than heat it up, obviously, but it is what it is. Anyway, so now I am going to start mashing in. Now my plan is to mash in all of the steam flaked barley first for two reasons. One is it's going to take quite a long time to mash in. I do not want to be adding my malted grains in here at that high temperature. I'd rather add them in at the end when I'm actually at my mash in temperature. And number two, the extra heat for the steam flaked barley is only going to be a good thing. When mashing in, you want to take it relatively slowly. Put a relatively small amount of grain in and then do a fair bit of stirring before adding a little bit more grain again. The idea here is that we want to avoid something called grain balls. Now grain balls are essentially where the grain will stick together and get wet on the outside but stay perfectly dry on the inside, and they can literally stay like that for hours and hours for the duration of your mash with very little if no liquid and enzymes penetrating into the inside, so essentially you're just going to lose efficiency. Alright, so I have all of the steam flaked barley and the oats in here. I'm going to do the distiller's malt next, and I'm going to leave the peated and the chocolate till the end, because I'm really looking forward to seeing what that smells like when it gets in there. Anyway, let me get to this. So I knew when I was mashing in that I was cutting things a little bit fine, only having 2-to-1 water to grain in terms of weight here. I really should have had a bit more, but I wanted to keep it on that side, so I had water up my sleeve to add. I could put hot water or cold water in to adjust the temperature as I went. So long story short, that's why this mash is so freaking thick. The reason the temperature of the mash is so important is that the temperature will adjust the fermentability of the wort coming out the other end. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail about all the ore grain stuff now because honestly there's just too much of it to fit into this video. But next week I'm going to do, I guess, an ore grain 101 video. So if you have questions or you have tips you want to get in, put them in the comments down below and I'll include those in next week's video. But for this recipe, I was aiming for 61 degrees, which is very fermentable indeed, so I knew I needed to add some more hot water. Alright guys, so we got that back up to 62 degrees in the end, which I'm cool with. It now has 150 litres, give or take, of liquid in there, and probably it's about 180-ish litres in total volume. So I'm going to cover that back up, insulate it, go have dinner with the family, leave this for about an hour, hour and a half probably to be honest, and then I'll come back and we'll take a gravity reading. This has been chilling for an hour and a half now. I managed to get dinner cooked, kids fed, showered, and in bed. So back to brewing now, I guess. Anyway, let's have a look in here and see what it's looking like. So while I was inside doing the family thing, the temperature of the mash has dropped down to 59 degrees, which I'm fine with. What I want to do is give it a good stir just to make sure it's all mixed up properly, and then I want to take a reading with my refractometer. As I hope you can see, it is quite a dark colour, which is awesome. That gives me hope that the chocolate, there's enough of that chocolate in there to do some damage, basically. But what I want to do now is get a refractometer reading. So that is... That's a little bit disappointing, I gotta say. That's 1068, somewhere around there. I was hoping for at least 5 points more than that. And to be honest, when I was making this recipe, I wasn't quite sure how much credit to give that steam flaked barley. I have also taken a tube full of the wort to cool down and to test with the hydrometer, just to make sure that I'm getting a pretty similar reading to my refractometer there, and sense check myself. Whoa, it's future Jesse here, guys. I have waited for this to cool down to 23 degrees. I got impatient and stopped there, but turns out that I think maybe my refractometer is a little bit out. It's telling me about sort of 1068. This is telling me with temperature adjustments closer to 1075. So I'm happy. So I'll let this cool down to pretty close to 20 degrees and then we'll give that a whirl. But in any case, guys, like I said, I am going to be doing basically an overnight mash. I'm just going to let this go down through every temperature range between here and whatever it gets to tomorrow morning. And I'm guessing, I'm hoping that the enzymes will continue to do some work overnight and we'll get maybe to 1070, 1072, something like that by tomorrow afternoon. So essentially, guys, I'm going to let that sit overnight. I am then going to come in and aerate it and decide whether or not I need to split it into another container, whether I think it's too full and it's going to overflow during fermentation. I did at the beginning of the video say that we were going to talk about yeast. When I first got the ingredients for this video on hand, I decided that I didn't want to spend like a whole lot of money on yeast, but I did want to use nice yeast. So I made a little small batch, a 30-litre batch of this stuff. Which is this right here, and I pitched US 05 yeast into it. The idea was to do it clean and pretty safe, to essentially grow this as a starter, make the ore grain mash, and then pitch this into that as my yeast pitch, basically. Now what happened is that this actually picked up an infection and it started to get a little bit funky, but I decided that it was a good funky and the Patreons helped me out. Gave me some advice, and in the end I decided that I was just going to use this as a pitch straight into that and let it do its thing, basically. What I did a couple of nights back is took some sugar and put it into this to see, just to see if there was still something viable in there for it to grow. Essentially, actually that was 4 nights ago now, I think. Nothing's happened. Nothing's happened at all. So, I will distill this. I will distill it separately, and I have high hopes for it. I think that maybe it's going to be delicious. But I won't be pitching this into the big fermenter, unfortunately. What I have done is picked up some Safale 04, which is an English yeast. I think that might be a little bit more fitting for an Irish whiskey anyway, and that hopefully some of those fruity characteristics and esters will make it over into the finished product. Anyway team, I'll be pitching that tomorrow, and I'm sure I will be catching up with you in videos in the very near future to let you know what's going on. Just a reminder team that next week I am going to be doing an all grain, essentially a Q&A session, so make sure you get your questions in down below down here, or if you have a pet peeve, something that you see being asked over and over again, or just something that you think would be helpful for new distillers or brewers to know, make sure you let me know down in the comments too. An extra huge special thank you for this one, guys, because the only reason that I can do a big ass recipe like this and play with larger volumes is because you guys help me out. So thank you guys, I thoroughly appreciate it. I also need to thank Aaron for hooking me up with a direct donation to do exactly this. He sent me a little bit of cash and told me to make an all grain whiskey with it. So yeah, hell yeah, I will, dude. But thank you, man. I thoroughly appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone that gets to watch this appreciates it as well. So thanks for hanging out, guys. I thoroughly enjoyed making this one, and I cannot wait to get it fermented and into the still. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you really enjoyed the video, make sure you subscribe down below as well, and I'll see you guys next time. See ya.